So, this right here is a Chumby One. As you can see, the case has a little bit of discoloring, but it's a little, looks like a miniature television. Has a knob on the side, a battery compartment on the back, and on the bottom, I'm sorry. And as you can see, Chumby One, USB port, headphone jack, and a power jack. Oh, and this is a power switch right here. This is basically a little clock radio. I don't know how else to describe it. It's Wi-Fi based. Came out, I think this one came out around 2009, 2008. I looked up when I bought this and it was 2009. So it's 7 years old now. And it has a resistive touchscreen and it runs Linux, a little ARM processor in it. And it's, of course, being 7 years old, is not very high spec. But anyways, the power input here, it's 5 volts. I use this thing every day as my alarm clock, so I do rely on this to work. And lately it's been acting kind of funny. So I figured this could be something to do with the power supply. One time before, the power supply actually failed. The included power supply failed on this. So I switched it to this 5 volt fairway unit here. See, it's 2-prong and everything. And it's a 5 volts output, 2 amp. And as you know, it's a switching power supply, so 100 to 240 volt input, 50 to 60 hertz, etc., etc. And all was well. But I have to say, something is up with this power supply. So I currently have the multimeter connected and the scope here in roll mode. So let's connect that up. So 5.5 volts, 5.2, peak to peak, 320 millivolts. So that's a good amount of ripple. But of course, I currently don't have it connected to anything, so that could be the explanation. But I wanted to see, I haven't actually tested this yet, but what's been happening is when I plug in the Chumby into this power supply, it tends to just reboot continually. So it doesn't boot up at all, it just kind of reboots. So what I want to do is I want to connect the Chumby to the power supply, see what happens to the voltage, because it seems fine right now, 5.3 volts. As you can see, I have the multimeter and the scope connected. And we are going to plug this in and we're going to watch what happens. Of course, this may just totally work, but I'm hoping that it will have a problem. Okay, so yeah. Oops, if I move the Chumby a little bit into view of the camera, as you can see, it just keeps rebooting, but look at that. I have a feeling that it's the power supply that's completely at fault here. And this voltage drop here is due to this switching power supply absolutely just crapping out. What was happening is occasionally I'd have trouble booting this up, but eventually it would sort of work. And then the other day it just rebooted actually while I was in the room, and it just kept rebooting just like this. Let's hook it up to the power supply and give it 5 volts from the bench power supply and see exactly what happens. Alright, so the Chumby works great, and I would be very sad if it was actually broken. But once again, it's killed another power supply. It's gone through 2. This little short cord, and there's a little bit of a heat shrink on there because I've repaired it once, and I will have to do it again. I just can't believe how crappy these power supplies are. So I cracked open this power supply here. It was pretty easy actually, just to see if I could see anything that looked damaged. So let's cut away this high voltage, and there we go. So right off the bat, what looks a little weird is, so there's this goop everywhere, but look at how it's so blackened and discolored right there. There's a little bit of the brown there, but the rest looks weirdly gooped. But this capacitor here seems fine. It just says vent on it, 105C. I can't see the manufacturer. Oh yeah, wait. This doesn't look. Oh, yeah. Something bad has happened here, hasn't it? Something very bad has happened. Why is the plastic completely missing the covering? Okay, so this electrolytic, if you can look, can you make it out just down there? Looks pretty bulged. some white goop on the pins there as well. This side looks fine. That side not so great. So I'll cut those out and we'll take a measure. Well, there's your problem. This was a 1000 microfarad 16 volt output cap here. And it seriously had a massive blowout. I mean, did you vent on the end? No. On the bottom, no. How about on the side? So, what a junky ass capacitor. Let's hook this up to the tester here. See what we get. Alright. A diode? Oh my god, I'm sorry. A 0 nanofarad capacitance and a forward voltage of 708 millivolts. Alright, so clearly this was not working. Obviously it is working as a diode. It's passing current the correct direction. So that's why we saw 5 volts. But as soon as there was any load on the power supply, that was dead and this did not work. So that was the output capacitor. I have the input capacitor here. Okay, here's the input capacitor. So yeah, I mean it definitely seems a bit bulgy there, and there's that corrosion right around the pin there, the positive pin. So clearly this cap was on its way to fail as well. So let's just see how this one tests. Alright, so 32 microfarads, and this is rated 33, and of course the ESR 3.2. Okay, so this one is still working relatively well, but was clearly ready to blow. But that would explain why this power supply totally died. Anyways, I'm going to replace the power supply, make the Chumby work. Okay, so sorry for the messy wires here, but I dug in my drawer and I found this Delta Electronics 5 volt 1 amp power supply. It's kind of a small one. Delta's a really good brand, so that's nice. It does have an external power cord, which is nice. Anyways, I have it hooked up right now. The Chumby is not currently connected, but it's on the scope on roll mode, 5 volts there. Let's just see what happens when I connect this to the Chumby, and actually watch if I unplug the power. The drop-off indicates that there is obviously capacitance going on there. So it takes a second to start as well. It has to bootstrap the controller, I guess. Anyhow, so let's connect to the Chumby and see what happens. See if this current draw exceeds this power supply and we get some voltage drop enough to mess with the Chumby and crash it. But so far, everything seems... This part of the boot sequence is lower power. When I had it hooked up to the bench power supply, as soon as it went past the screen with the circles here, it started drawing more current. But all seems good. We're still at 5.1 volts. I think this is normal. We have these sort of gray circles now instead of the colored ones. Oh, maybe not. Maybe this is rebooted again. Yeah, okay, I think this is not working as well. Wow. We're not seeing specific drop here like we were with that other power supply, but this thing is definitely not happy now. But I know it worked perfectly on the bench power supply, so clearly this Delta power supply here is just not giving enough current, and we must not be seeing it here. Can I speed up? No, we're at the maximum speed on the Rigol there. Obviously there is some voltage drop going on, so this does not work. I will have to find a more beefy power supply. Alright, before I switch this power supply, I have added a 2200 microfarad cap to the power rail there, and we're just gonna have to see what happens. But let's plug in the Chumby with that cap added on just for fun. I can't imagine it's gonna work. The Chumby seems very sensitive to voltage drop. You know, it's possible that this Chumby is just, maybe its power supply is also not so great. Although I'm sure that the ARM processor runs on 3.3 volts, but there's stuff like USB. No, it just rebooted. So okay, clearly this thing is not enough. All right, I'm gonna try and find a better power supply. Okay, next up, I found this Linksys power supply, 5 volts, 2.5 amps, and conveniently, if I show you this, I had already taken the connector for something else on this, so perfect to be connecting to the Chumby. Hopefully this thing works properly. Let's give it a try. All right, here we go. Power supply number 3. It should all be a go. Let's see what happens. Boom. It's a little wobbly on there. Looks quite wobbly. I have no idea if this power supply is any good, but that is not looking so great. Nope. It just rebooted again. Wow, I cannot find a 5-volt power supply that doesn't suck. Look at this. Look how this is looking a lot like the first failed power supply. I wonder if this one is dead as well. I mean, this makes me just question if the Chumby is really the problem or what. I think this power supply is also failed. Oh, just for my sanity, I'm going to connect the bench power supply again and make sure that the Chumby is working. Okay, I'm going to do, there it is. So I set the trigger to capture a single shot as soon as the voltage drops. And there it is, dropping pretty low there. So let's turn on the cursors here. Okay, so hopefully you can see this clearly enough. What happens is, as soon as the thing starts to boot up, the rail, which at least on the capture I have, the top of it is 4.8 volts, it dips down to 4.1, which is clearly not enough. The processor is probably running at 3.3, and I'm sure the regulation power supply that's running the processor fails when it drops that low. And it does it just for a very short time, 2 microseconds. But basically it's still enough to crash the Chumby. So there's just no way that this crappy ass power supply is actually working. This is frustrating. But the scope allowed me to see that, which I have to say is very helpful. Here's the Linksys power supply. I remove the capacitors. So interesting is the input cap is only rated for 200 volts, and I was like, what? That's not right. That's too low. But then I took a look at the power at the case, and it's rated for 100 to 120 volts only. So they are not rating it for a 240 volt operation. But anyways, this cap, which is 33 microfarad, works absolutely fine. And then the output had these 3 caps on it. G Luxon brand, 1000 microfarad, 10 volts. And wouldn't you know it, all 3 of these actually come in at about 1300 microfarads, 0.05 ohms ESR. So these are working correctly. So I really don't get what was going on there. What explains this kind of crazy voltage drop we were getting on the output? I mean, everything in this thing looked fine. The way it was connected, there was nothing loose. I didn't see any bad solder joints. Everything seemed fine. So why was the output dropping like that? That is just weird. So anyways, I guess I ruined this power supply for no reason, although that just doesn't seem like normal behavior. Anyways, I don't know what was going on with this, but I'm going to chalk this up to being failed in some other way. Maybe the feedback loop is bad. I ruined this power supply, and I got these 3 caps with a really nice ESR out of it, and I am nowhere closer to making this work. And now I have a problem. I've kind of looked through all my junk drawer power supplies, and I don't even have a single 5-volt power supply left. Oh, you know what though? I have a bunch of phone ones. So maybe that's what I need to do. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this cable that plugs in the back of the Chumby, and I'm going to put a USB connector on it. Yeah. All right. Well, guess what? So I hooked up the Chumby back to the bench power supply, and I had the scope on single shot, just like it is here. And wouldn't you know it, while booting, I had the same voltage drop to 4.1 volts, and this thing rebooted. The only thing I could think of is that this solder connection or something here was bad. And maybe this has been my problem all along. This shows troubleshooting steps that I did not follow. So I cut this out and connected the bench power supply directly to the cable that plugs in the back of the Chumby, and now it's working fine. And no voltage dip on here at all. I mean, it's still sitting here waiting. So, because I'm out of power supply since I ruined the Linksys one, I'm going to try to use this 1+1 power supply here. It's 2 amps. I have a USB cord here. It's very, very thin, the wires. So I cut it down to short length like this, and we're going to see what will happen. I will monitor the voltage on there and see how it goes. But without this, maybe it'll work. Okay, I think I finally have it. So I currently have 1+1 power supply connected. I have the short USB pigtail soldered directly onto the power cord that goes into the Chumby. It's currently running at just under 5 volts, and that's with this particular 1+1 power supply. And I have the trigger set on the scope, so of course if it dips below 4 point, ish volts, 4 point something. Let's see what the exact trigger voltage is. 4.5 now. Then it will trigger. Now the Chumby is booting normally now, so it's weird because originally I was using some alligator clips and it was not booting properly. So, although actually, did it just reboot? No, it's working, initializing. So I think I'm pretty good shape now. And let's see here. Okay, Chumby's fully booted. Let's unplug the power here. Of course, the scope triggered because it dropped below that threshold. So I'll plug this back in and we'll set this to single shot. Chumby is powered up, 5.03 volts. Definitely when the Chumby goes into its high current drain mode, this drops a little bit, the 1+1 power supply. A lot of it's probably due to this very thin USB cable I'm using. But let's see what happens here. Once it goes into high drain mode, you should see the voltage drop on the multimeter. Maybe, maybe not. Oh, it takes a bit of time here. Chumby is still sitting there. Okay, there we go. Under 5 volts. But it's booting. That made the little noise it makes. And no dropping below 4.5 volts. So this thing is happy. Oh, that's about to power off. Sorry about that. There we go. This didn't have auto power off. And then I cut the trace on the main board on this UT61E, and now it seems to be too short, the auto power off. I wonder if that's some kind of setting in here. I don't think it is, though. It seems to be, I don't know, like a couple minutes, and then it goes off. It's actually just too short. But anyways, problem solved. Even though I ruined that extra power supply because of all my shitty wiring, you know what? I'm happy that I went to USB. I charge my phone next to my bed anyways, so I'm actually going to just buy an Anker 3-port USB power supply because I need one to charge my Nexus 6P, I need one to charge this other device I have sometimes next to my bed, and then I'll power the Chumby off that same power supply. You know what? It's going to be a bit more efficient now running all 3 things off one power supply versus having more plugs and things next to my bed. So, problem solved. I switched to USB. And I'm good. I'm just going to resolder these cables, put some heat shrink on it, and call it a day. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something from all my troubleshooting mistakes here that I've shown. And like I said, if your Chumby is malfunctioning and doesn't seem to boot anymore, check the power supply because it's very sensitive to power dropouts, and clearly the first one was probably bad. Well, it was bad. We looked at the capacitors. That second power supply with the power capacitors that all were perfect, I have a feeling it was probably fine, and it was actually my wiring that was the problem. And then I tried USB, and it still was not working. I was getting the dropout, but I just soldered it connected directly, got rid of these stupid alligator clips, and everything started working. So there we go. Thanks for watching. Bye.